years. Think about it, 1,000 years ago, for this big of a China to unify all the quantitative measures through China, only 28 years. That is already, the modern reform is already more than 20 years. We still haven't got a clue of how the social system, but
how did he do it?
Well, see, exactly, how did he do it? Well, burning the book is one, sorry. But it's like reduce the
Reduction.
Yes,
Reduction.
minimalism, right? Reduce the complexity to a absolutely common denominator. That's where the message, that's where the energy, that's where things can happen. So speed, and that's another great Chinese word.
Well, that sounds like willfulness also comes in somehow.
Anyway, so somehow, as profession kind of demands, we, myself and many colleagues in architectural, tends to kind of think heritage in a very abstract, in a very kind of metaphysical way. So that actually it became non-gravitational, it became non-iconographic and non-referential. And that's the only way you can then become light and then creative, and then light is also equivalent to speed. We have, as architect, we have to work in high speed, and somehow that's just come together in this process of our work.
That's interesting, the way you framed or reduced something very complex into three very essential words, and that kind of describes to me somehow both your conditions, because you obviously, in the most direct way, took to speed, abstraction, simplicity, which I would want to get to, but I also want to ask Yi, does that sort of explain somewhat how you can navigate so many different realities and at the same time have a perspective on the present, because your ability to what do you say, to roll with the punches, flexible, right? To be flexible, to have that kind of adaptability?
I think so, yes, because in my case also, like if I think back, like I'm very old school trained, and in the sense like it's like from the design principle, it's very much like to understand the form, how form is being created. So to me, that's a very pure way of approaching design. So therefore, it's also understanding what the reduction means, like really approaching design only when it's necessary, that there is function follows form or form follows function. There's always the discussion between those two. So therefore, the reduction part or addition to it when you do need or not. So that's a design principle that I very adhere to myself very personally. And even right now in my reality, when I have to do design for Converse, which is it's a commercial brand. It's on a big scale. It's a very accessible fashion as well. So in that case, it's also to understand how the accessibility, that simpleness, that keep it simple, keep it straightforward, like how to apply my own personal design philosophy, the way how I approach that, to kind of get into a very simple, straightforward way. So I think the way of, let's say, my own personal approach to design, as well as perhaps as well I don't think in terms of being Chinese in the design way, it's just the one thing that comes up with it, but maybe intuitively there's that natural feeling towards keeping things simple that just comes through in my design work as well.
Okay, Yeohlee, you're Miss Simple, so say more about that.
I never really dwelt on it, and I didn't really, I came to the realization rather later on in my career, but what brought it forth this morning were the questions that you posed. And, being a kind of devout minimalist, I like to boil everything down to its like barest bones. and the barest bones about the Chinese approach, I don't know if all of you or any of you will agree, is that we revere simplicity as a culture, don't we? I mean, look at...
I would like to know why.
I
think I agree that we love the simple.
So that's why I started in that direction. But personally, I never think about whether I'm, I never think about whether I'm Chinese, Malay, or whatever, because, I grew up in a hybrid society. Like my grandmother was Burmese, there's like lots of intermarriages of cultures. The Dutch were present, the British were very present, but the French were there, and we grew up with, my best friend was, a Pakistani, and then there were Bengalis, so it was very cross-cultural. And then when I came here, and even before I came here, I was steeped in American culture because I just loved movies. So, the big heroes when I was little was like John Wayne, and Gunfight at OK Corral. I had all these like wild ideas in my head. And then when I got to New York, all I did was steep myself in the culture.
Well, that's interesting because, you talk about unification. And of course, China is a huge country, and when I started talking about Chineseness, it's kind of a little absurd in some ways because, I spent time in Hong Kong and I spent time in Beijing, and there's a lot of difference even between the North and the South, but it got unified. So in that sense, perhaps the simplicity is about not reduction alone, but unification, perhaps?
Well, we should explore that because I'm very interested in it because I think that the simplicity factor came up with the four of us, right?
Right.
But we're very diverse, we're very different. So that aspect unifies us.
Right.
And hopefully you.
Well, I would add one more. It's a anecdote where a couple of days ago I was invited to participate in this annual forum in Philip Johnson's Glass House. For some of you that relate to architecture, that's kind of a pilgrimage of modern architectural practitioners and educators. And the topic was about transparency. And I was the only architect there, then politicians and educators talking about how modernism, it actually brings the notion of transparency in our cultural agenda. And they were talking about democracy, glass, transparent, and I said, well, wait a moment. Crystal and gold are not only cultural materials. What about jade? And jade is translucent. Maybe that's real. That's like 21st century politics. It's not transparent. It actually should be translucent because translucency give you a flexibility. Yes, give you a flexibility of you can charge the distance and adjacency the truth. But because there's never going to be the truth, or revealing the truth may not even be healthier for cultural development. So why do you want to really be a transparency? That's how the whole kind of scandal of who Philip Johnson was and what the glass houses. So I think that's raw material. You should use jade or alabaster and make it translucent politics. Exactly. So I think, I just throw this idea about translucency in modern politics. Then after that I thought, that's Chinese, right?
Yes.
Anyway, so I just think Chineseness has a lot to do with future. This is what I've said. Reflective process is always result in tradition, heritage, and what you know and what you're accustomed to. That's where we are differentiated from other. But if culture is also creative process, that's really to look for a future. And future is where we are actually brought into commonality. But past is not. So I think Chineseness, in its ability to reach to a 21st century future, it may be more hopeful than ever. And we were so ashamed. When in the 60s and 70s, we actually, as with young students, we were actually ashamed about Chinese culture. We kind of tend to be modern. We read Nietzsche. We need kind of Descartes. We need everything, but no Confucius, no nothing. But because we didn't know that was actually about future. Confucius is about future. It's so confused. It's so
That's why it's so
future is
confusing.
now brought to more clarity. Anyway, so I think there is a shift in.
Well, the thing is, you just got me thinking about, black and white versus gray, right? So transparent, opacity, no. Translucency. Yin, yang, balance. Harmony, which is the battle cry of China today. Maybe that is really the core, that when you finally, the reverberation of extremes settle in the middle, you get the most balanced. And maybe when we're skirting the issue about simplicity or